Everyone was invited to Christmas except me. My daughter-in-law sweetly said in the family group, "Your invitation is that we're letting you stay another year in the family." They laughed. I didn't. I stood and made one call. They went silent when they found out that I owned more property in this town than any of them could ever dream of. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the moment that shattered what was left of my heart. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the blue one Richard had bought me for our 30th anniversary, when my phone buzzed with notifications from the family group chat. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. At 68, I still wasn't completely comfortable with all this technology, but I'd learned to navigate it well enough to stay connected with my children and grandchildren. The first message was from my son David. "Hey everyone."
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
"Sarah and I are hosting Christmas dinner this year. Mom, we've got everything covered, so don't worry about bringing anything." I smiled, thinking how thoughtful it was of them to take over the hosting duties. Christmas had been my responsibility for 43 years, ever since Richard and I bought this house and started our own traditions. Maybe it was time to let the younger generation take the reins. Then came Sarah's message, and my world tilted sideways. "Actually, we've decided to keep it small this year, just immediate family. David, kids, my parents, and my sister's family. We've already sent out the invitations." I read it 3 times, my heart sinking deeper with each word. Immediate family. But wasn't I immediate family? I was David's mother, for heaven's sake. I'd given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything for him and his sister Rachel. The messages kept coming. Rachel chimed in with, "Sounds perfect. Mom won't have to stress about cooking. She can just relax at home." My youngest son Michael added, "Great idea. Mom's been looking tired lately anyway." Tired? I wasn't tired. I was 68, not 98. I still worked in my garden every day, still drove myself to the grocery store, still lived independently in the house Richard and I had built together. But it was Sarah's next message that cut deepest of all. "Don't worry, Margaret. Your invitation is that we're letting you stay another year in the family." The laughing emojis that followed felt like tiny knives piercing my chest. My own children were laughing. Michael sent a crying, laughing emoji. Rachel wrote, "OMG, Sarah, you're terrible," followed by more laughing faces. Even David, my firstborn, the boy I'd stayed up with through countless sleepless nights when he had asthma, added a, "LOL, Mom. Sarah's just kidding." But I knew she wasn't kidding. There was something cold and calculating behind Sarah's jokes that had been growing stronger over the past 3 years, ever since Richard passed away. I set the phone down with shaking hands and stared at the Christmas tree I'd already decorated. The ornaments told the story of our family. Handmade angels the children had crafted in elementary school, the ceramic star David had given me in college, the delicate glass snowflakes Rachel had chosen for my 60th birthday. Each one held a memory, a moment of love and togetherness. Now I was being told I didn't belong at Christmas. My own family was gathering without me, and my presence had been reduced to a joke about letting me stay in the family. I thought about the past 3 years, how things had gradually changed. After Richard's funeral, Sarah had started making little comments about how the house was too big for just me. She'd suggest I might be more comfortable in a nice retirement community where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and yard work. At first, I'd brushed off her concerns as genuine care. But then came the subtle digs about my cooking being too heavy for modern tastes, my furniture being outdated, my stories about the grandchildren's father being repetitive. Slowly but surely, Sarah had been reshaping family gatherings to revolve around her preferences, her timeline, her vision of what our family should be, and my children had just gone along with it. I picked up my phone again and scrolled back through months of family messages. The pattern was there, clear as day once I really looked for it. Sarah suggesting I might want to rest instead of attending Michael's birthday dinner. Sarah mentioning that the grandchildren were too energetic for me when I offered to babysit. Sarah deciding that family photos should be just the nuclear families for her Christmas card. Each exclusion had been wrapped in concern for my well-being or practical considerations. But the result was the same. I was being erased from my own family, one gathering at a time. The house felt impossibly quiet around me. For 45 years, this place had been filled with the sounds of family life. Children running up and down the stairs, laughter echoing from the kitchen, holiday chaos and birthday celebrations. Now it was just me and the ghosts of better times. I thought about Richard, about how he would have reacted to this message thread. He would have driven straight to David's house and demanded an explanation. He would have protected me the way I'd always protected our children. But Richard was gone, and I was alone with a family that seemed to see me as an obligation rather than a person they loved. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a private message from Sarah. "Margaret, I hope you understand that we're just trying to start some new traditions. The kids are getting older, and David and I want to host sometimes. I'm sure you can find something nice to do on Christmas. Maybe watch some movies or call your sister in Florida." Something nice to do? As if Christmas was just another day for me to fill with random activities instead of the most important family celebration of the year. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting in the chair for too long. But it wasn't just my body that felt stiff and brittle. Something inside me had crystallized into cold, hard resolve. I walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for nearly half a century. The house directly across the street, the two-story colonial with the red door. I owned that. The apartment complex 3 blocks down where young families were just starting out. I owned that too. The commercial building downtown where Sarah got her hair done. Mine as well. They had no idea. None of them had any idea. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. My hands were steady now, my voice clear. "Hello, James? It's Margaret Wilson. I need you to call an immediate family meeting. Yes, all of them. David, Rachel, Michael, and their spouses. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. No, not at David's house. At your office. And James? I think it's time they learned exactly who they're dealing with." As I hung up the phone, I could almost hear Richard's voice in my ear, proud and strong. "That's my girl. Show them what you're made of." The laughing emojis were about to become very expensive jokes. The next morning, I woke before dawn as I had every day since Richard's death. The house felt different somehow, as if the conversation with James had shifted something fundamental in the air around me. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table where Richard and I had shared breakfast for 43 years, where we'd helped the children with homework, where we'd planned our dreams and weathered our storms. It was here, at this very table, that everything had changed 3 years ago. I remember the morning after Richard's funeral like it was yesterday. The house was still full of casserole dishes from well-meaning neighbors, the refrigerator packed with food I had no appetite to eat. I was sitting right here, staring at nothing, when my father called. "Margaret, honey, I need to talk to you about something important." His voice was different that day, older somehow, as if Richard's death had reminded him of his own mortality. "Can you come over today?" Dad was 89 then, still living independently in the farmhouse where I'd grown up, but I could hear the weariness creeping into his voice. I drove the 30 minutes to his place, grateful for something to do besides sit in my empty house and feel sorry for myself. He was waiting for me on the front porch, a manila envelope in his weathered hands. "Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk about your inheritance." I'd expected maybe a few $1,000s, perhaps some family heirlooms. Dad had been a simple farmer his whole life, working land that had been in our family for 3 generations. The farm was modest, the house was old, and I'd never thought of my father as anything more than comfortable. "Margaret, I need to tell you something I probably should have shared years ago." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. "This farm? It's sitting on some of the most valuable land in the county. Has been for 30 years, ever since they announced the new highway development." I stared at him, not understanding. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "I've been getting offers to sell for decades, big money offers. But I wanted to keep farming, keep living the life your mother and I built here." He handed me the first document. 3 months ago, I finally accepted one. "Margaret, this farm sold for $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 million. I read the settlement papers 3 times before the words began to make sense. "There's more," he continued gently. I've been investing that money, along with some other land deals I made over the years. Margaret, you're inheriting just over $7 million. $7 million. I sat there on my father's porch, still wearing the black dress I'd worn to my husband's funeral just days before, trying to process what he was telling me. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I whispered. Dad smiled sadly. "Because money changes things, sweetheart. Look what happened to the Patterson family when they struck oil. Look how the Hendersons' children fought over their inheritance before old Henry was even dead. I wanted you kids to love me for who I was, not what I could give you." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, grieving my husband, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life, and suddenly I was worth more money than I'd ever dreamed of. But Richard wasn't here to share it with me. The man who'd worked double shifts to help pay for the children's college, who'd driven used cars so we could afford family vacations, would never know that we'd ended up wealthy. "Dad, I don't know what to do with this information. That's why I'm telling you now, while you're still raw and honest, before you have time to let it change you." He reached over and took my hand. "Margaret, you're a good woman. You raised good children. Use this money wisely, and for heaven's sake, don't let it make you a target." I drove home that day with the inheritance papers locked in my glove compartment, my mind spinning. $7 million. It was more money than our entire family had ever seen combined. But something about Dad's words stuck with me. Don't let it make you a target. I thought about my children, about their struggles with money. David and Sarah had been fighting about finances since their wedding. They'd bought a house they couldn't afford. Sarah had expensive tastes, and David worked constantly to try to keep up with her demands. Rachel was drowning in student loans from her master's degree, and Michael was just starting his career with a mountain of debt from medical school. If I told them about the inheritance, everything would change. They'd start seeing me differently, treating me differently. Every decision I made would be viewed through the lens of my wealth. Every family gathering would become an opportunity for someone to hint about their financial struggles or suggest how I might help. So I decided to keep it secret, at least for a while, just until I figured out how to handle it properly. I had James Porter, my father's attorney, quietly invest most of the money in stable, long-term investments. I kept enough to live comfortably and to quietly help my children when they really needed it. But I lived exactly the same way I always had. Same house, same car, same modest lifestyle. The first year passed peacefully. I was still grieving Richard, still adjusting to life alone, and the secret felt like a burden I was carrying for the family's own good. I helped David and Sarah with their mortgage payments once, telling them I'd received a small insurance settlement. I paid off Rachel's student loans, claiming it was money Richard had set aside for her education. I bought Michael a reliable car, saying I'd gotten a good deal from a friend. Each time, I watched their faces light up with relief and gratitude, but I also noticed something else. They were grateful to me, yes, but they also seemed to see me as someone to come to when they needed help. The dynamic was changing, even without them knowing the full truth about my financial situation. It was Sarah who started asking questions first. About 18 months after the inheritance, she began making comments about my mysterious financial resources. "It's so lucky that you keep getting these little windfalls, Margaret," she'd say with a tight smile. "Insurance settlements, savings accounts Richard forgot to mention. It's almost like you're hiding money from us." She said it like a joke, but there was something sharp in her voice that made me uncomfortable. I started paying attention to Sarah in a way I hadn't before. The way she watched me when I paid for dinner. The way she questioned my purchases, the way she seemed to be keeping track of every dollar I spent. Then, about 6 months ago, I came home from grocery shopping to find Sarah in my house. She claimed David had given her a key for emergencies, and she was there to check on me because I hadn't answered my phone. But I found her in Richard's old study, going through the filing cabinet where I kept important papers. "Oh, Margaret," she said, quickly closing the drawer. "I was just looking for a pen to leave you a note. I hope you don't mind." I minded very much, but I didn't say anything at the time. Instead, I quietly installed a small security camera in the study, hidden behind one of Richard's old books. Over the next few months, that camera captured Sarah making 3 more emergency visits to my house, each time going straight to the filing cabinet. She was looking for something, and I was pretty sure I knew what it was. The family dynamic started shifting after that. Sarah began making subtle comments about my age, my ability to live alone, my confusion about various topics. She'd correct me in front of the grandchildren, suggest that I was misremembering things, hint that I might be developing early signs of dementia. "Margaret just gets a little mixed up sometimes," she'd tell David when I'd contradict her version of events. "It's normal at her age." I wasn't mixed up, I wasn't confused, but I started noticing that my children were looking at me differently, as if they were seeing signs of decline that I couldn't see myself. The Christmas invitation, or lack thereof, was just the latest move in whatever game Sarah was playing. But it was also the move that showed me she'd gone too far. I finished my coffee and got dressed carefully. Today was the day my family would learn the truth about exactly who they'd been dismissing. Today was the day Sarah's little investigation would finally pay off, just not in the way she'd hoped. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving for James's office. At 68, I looked exactly like what I was: a widow, a mother, a grandmother who'd lived a quiet life and asked for very little. But looks, as my father had taught me, could be deceiving. By the end of today, my family would know that the woman they'd been treating like a burden was actually the wealthiest person any of them had ever met. And Sarah would learn that some secrets are far more dangerous when they're finally revealed. James Porter's law office sat in the heart of downtown, in one of those stately brick buildings that had witnessed decades of family secrets and business deals. I'd been here before, of course, when Richard and I updated our wills, when we bought the house, when we handled Dad's estate. But today felt different. Today, I wasn't here as someone's wife or daughter. I was here as myself. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room, watching through the tall windows as my family members arrived. David came first, looking confused and slightly annoyed. He kept checking his phone and glancing around as if he was expecting to see me somewhere. Rachel pulled up next, her face tight with worry. Michael arrived last, practically jogging from his car to the building entrance. They congregated in the lobby, their voices carrying up to where I sat. I could hear David asking the receptionist if there had been some mistake, if she was sure their mother had called this meeting. The receptionist, bless her, simply directed them to the conference room as I'd instructed. Sarah was the last to arrive, and I watched her through the window with particular interest. She took her time getting out of the car, checking her appearance in the side mirror, smoothing her hair. Even from a distance, I could see the calculation in her movements. She thought she knew what this meeting was about. She thought she was finally going to get confirmation of what she'd been searching for in my filing cabinet. She was right about that, just not in the way she expected. James appeared at my elbow. "They're all here, Margaret. Are you ready for this?" I stood up, straightening my simple navy dress. "I've been ready for 3 years, James. I just didn't know it until yesterday." The conference room fell silent when I walked in. My 3 children sat on one side of the long mahogany table, their spouses across from them. The arrangement looked formal, almost adversarial, which seemed fitting given what was about to happen. "Mom," David started, half rising from his chair. "What's this about? James said it was urgent family business, but you look fine. Are you sick? Are you—" "Sit down, David." My voice was calm but firm, and something in my tone made him comply immediately. "James has some information to share with you. Information I should have shared 3 years ago." James opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table. Financial statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. The numbers were visible from where my family sat, but I could see them struggling to make sense of what they were looking at. "Your mother," James began in his measured attorney voice, "is the beneficiary of your grandfather's estate, which was settled 3 years ago upon his death." Rachel frowned. "We know that, James. Grandpa left Mom the farm. But what does that have to do with—" "The farm," James interrupted gently, "sold for $4.2 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the old building settling around us. Sarah's face had gone completely white. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Rachel just stared at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "That's impossible," Michael finally whispered. "Grandpa was a farmer. He lived in that old house with the leaky roof and the broken front steps. He drove a truck from 1987. Your grandfather," I said quietly, "was sitting on some of the most valuable development land in 3 counties. He knew it, but he chose to keep farming because that was the life he loved. When he finally decided to sell, he made sure the money went to someone he trusted to use it wisely. James continued the revelation. After taxes and legal fees, Margaret inherited approximately $7 million. She also inherited 3 additional parcels of land that your grandfather had purchased over the years as investments. $7 million. The number hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Sarah was the first to find her voice. $7 million. She repeated it like she was testing the words. Margaret, you've had $7 million for 3 years? And you never told us? No, I said simply. I never told you. But why? This from David, his voice cracking like it had when he was 13 and asking why his pet dog had to be put down. Mom, we're your family. We've been struggling. Sarah and I have been fighting about money for years. Rachel's been working 2 jobs to pay off her loans. Michael's been eating ramen noodles since medical school. Why wouldn't you help us? I did help you, I replied. David, who do you think paid your mortgage when you were behind 3 months last year? Rachel, where do you think the money for your loan payments came from? Michael, who bought you that car when yours broke down? The understanding dawned on their faces slowly, like sunrise creeping across a landscape. You, Rachel breathed. It was you. All those insurance settlements and savings accounts Dad forgot to mention. That was your inheritance money. I helped you when you truly needed it, I confirmed, but I didn't tell you where the money came from because I wanted to protect you from this. I gestured to the room, to their shocked faces, to the sudden tension crackling between us like electricity. From what? Sarah demanded, her voice rising. From being grateful? From treating you with the respect you deserve? From including you in financial decisions that affect the whole family? There it was, the real issue. Sarah wasn't upset that I'd kept the money secret. She was upset that she hadn't been given access to it. From being treated differently because of what I have rather than who I am, I said, and I think the events of the past few months have proven that my instincts were correct. James cleared his throat and slid another document across the table. There's more. Margaret has been investing conservatively but wisely over the past 3 years. Her current net worth, including the properties she's purchased, is approximately $12 million. If $7 million had been shocking, $12 million was devastating. Michael actually pushed back from the table as if the number might attack him. Rachel covered her face with her hands. David just stared at me like he'd never seen me before. But it was Sarah's reaction that interested me most. After the initial shock wore off, I could see her mind working, calculating. She was already figuring out how this new information could benefit her. $12 million, she said slowly. Mom, do you realize what this means? We could pay off our house completely. David could quit that awful job he hates. We could finally afford that vacation home we've been dreaming about. The kids could go to private school. We? I repeated quietly. Well, yes. I mean, your family, Margaret. What's yours is ours, right? That's how families work. The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different, heavier, more dangerous. Is that how families work, Sarah? I asked. Because yesterday, my family decided that I wasn't immediate family anymore. Yesterday, my invitation to Christmas was being allowed to stay in the family for another year. Yesterday, my own children laughed when you made that joke. David's face flushed red. Mom, Sarah was just kidding around. You know she didn't mean anything by it. Didn't she? I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. Would you like me to read the messages again? Would you like me to count how many laughing emojis you all sent when your wife suggested that my place in this family was subject to her approval? The shame on their faces was almost too painful to watch. Almost. James, I continued, turning to my attorney, would you please explain to my family what changes I've made to my estate planning as of this morning? James opened another folder. As of 9 a.m. today, Margaret has revised her will. The previous beneficiaries have been removed, and the estate will now be divided among several charitable organizations. The explosion of voices was immediate and overwhelming. David shouting about how this was all a misunderstanding. Rachel crying that she was sorry, that she'd never meant to hurt me. Michael demanding to know if I was serious, if I was really going to give away their inheritance over a stupid joke. But Sarah's reaction was the most telling. She didn't plead or cry or apologize. She attacked. This is ridiculous, Margaret. You're being dramatic and spiteful. So what if we didn't invite you to one Christmas dinner? You're acting like we committed some terrible crime. Families have disagreements. Families get on each other's nerves sometimes. That doesn't mean you throw away decades of relationship over hurt feelings. Hurt feelings? I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the table. Sarah, for the past 6 months you've been breaking into my house and going through my personal documents. Don't bother denying it. I have video evidence. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. I installed a security camera after I found you in Richard's study. I have recordings of you searching through my filing cabinet on 3 separate occasions. I know you've been looking for information about my finances. I know you've been trying to find ammunition to use against me. David turned to stare at his wife. Sarah, is that true? I was just concerned about her, Sarah stammered. She's been acting strange, making all these mysterious payments. I thought maybe someone was taking advantage of her, or that she was getting confused about money. I was trying to protect her. Protect me from what? I asked. From making my own decisions about my own money? From choosing how to help my family without broadcasting my personal business? From living my life without your supervision and approval? You were lying to us. Sarah's composure finally cracked completely. You were pretending to be this poor widow who needed our help and our pity, when all along you were sitting on millions of dollars. That's fraud, Margaret. That's manipulation. No, I said quietly. That's exactly what I was trying to avoid. I looked around the table at my children, at the people I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for. They were looking at me like I was a stranger, like the mother they'd known had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. Maybe she had been. The conference room felt like a battlefield after Sarah's outburst. My children sat frozen, processing the reality that their mother wasn't the helpless widow they'd imagined, while Sarah looked like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. James cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should take a short break. No, I said firmly. We're not done here. Sarah, since you've been so interested in my personal documents, I think it's time you learned exactly what you've stumbled into. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were printed screenshots from the security footage, bank statements, and something else that would change everything. James, would you please show them the property ownership records? He spread out a new set of documents across the table. Property deeds, all with my name as the owner. David leaned forward, squinting at the addresses. This is the Riverside apartment complex where Michael lives, he said slowly. Yes, I confirmed. I bought it 18 months ago. And this one. Rachel picked up another deed. This is the medical building where Dr. Peterson has his practice. The building where you've been taking David's kids for their checkups. Also mine. Michael was staring at a deed with growing horror. Mom, this is my address. This is my apartment building. Are you telling me that I've been paying rent to my own mother for the past year and a half? You've been paying rent to a property management company that handles several of my investments. Yes. The implications were sinking in, and I could see the embarrassment and confusion spreading across their faces. But Sarah was still focused on what she saw as the real issue. So you've been playing games with us, she snapped. Setting up these elaborate schemes to, what, test us? See how we'd react? I've been trying to help my family while maintaining my privacy and independence, I replied. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you, Sarah? I opened my folder and pulled out the printed screenshots from my security camera, clear images of Sarah at my filing cabinet, documents in her hands, caught red-handed in my private space. These are time-stamped, I said, sliding them across the table. March 15th, April 2nd, and April 28th. 3 separate occasions when you used David's emergency key to enter my house and search through my personal papers. David stared at the photos, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like betrayal. Sarah, what the hell were you doing? I told you. I was worried about her. But Sarah's voice lacked conviction now. She was acting strangely, making these mysterious payments. I thought maybe she was being scammed or maybe you thought there was money to be found. I interrupted. Maybe you'd notice that I seem to have more resources than a widow on Social Security should have, and you wanted to know where it was coming from. I pulled out another document from my folder. This one made Sarah's face go ashen. This, I said, is a copy of a consultation request you made with Elder Care Legal Services 3 weeks ago. You inquired about the process for obtaining guardianship over an elderly family member who might be experiencing cognitive decline. The silence that followed was deafening. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Rachel had her hand over her mouth in shock. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. Guardianship? David's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, you were trying to get guardianship over my mother? It wasn't like that, Sarah said desperately. I was just researching options. Margaret's been making questionable financial decisions, and I thought maybe… Questionable financial decisions like helping my children when they needed it? I asked. Or questionable like not giving you access to money that isn't yours? I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out the final piece of evidence. A printed email thread that James had helped me obtain through legal channels. This is an email exchange between you and your sister Lisa from last month, I said, sliding it toward David. Would you like to read it out loud, or shall I? David picked up the papers with trembling hands. His face grew darker as he read. Sarah writes, I think I've figured out where Margaret's money is coming from. David's dad must have left more than they told the kids. If I can prove she's not managing it properly, we might be able to get control of it. David works so hard and deserves better than living paycheck to paycheck when his mother is sitting on a fortune. David's voice broke as he continued reading, and Lisa responds, Be careful how you approach this. Maybe start documenting instances where she seems confused or makes poor decisions. Build a case gradually. The betrayal on David's face was heartbreaking to watch. This was his wife, the woman he'd trusted with his heart and his family, plotting to essentially steal from his mother. And your sister's response? David continued, his voice getting harder with each word. Perfect. Once you get guardianship, you can move Margaret into a nice facility where she'll be well cared for, and David can finally live the life he deserves. With that kind of money, you could quit your job and focus on the kids. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, the tears of someone whose carefully laid plans were crumbling around them. David, you have to understand, she pleaded. I was doing this for us, for our family. Your mother has been hoarding money while watching you struggle. She's been playing games with us, pretending to be poor while she's secretly rich. That's not normal behavior. Normal behavior? David's voice was rising now. What's not normal is breaking into someone's house to steal their personal information. What's not normal is plotting to have your husband's mother declared incompetent so you can steal her money. I wasn't going to steal anything. I was going to make sure it was managed properly. Margaret's almost 70 years old. She shouldn't be making major financial decisions on her own. She's 68, Rachel said quietly. And she's sharper than any of us. She's been managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio for 3 years without any of us even knowing about it. I stood up slowly, gathering my documents. Sarah, I want you to understand something very clearly. This isn't about the money. This isn't about Christmas dinner or family traditions or hurt feelings. This is about respect. I looked around the table at my children, my heart breaking for what this family had become. I kept my inheritance secret because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have. I wanted to help you when you needed it without changing the fundamental dynamic of our relationships. I wanted to remain your mother, not become your benefactor. But, Mom, Michael started, we do love you for who you are. Do you? I interrupted. Because yesterday, when you thought I was just a widow living on Social Security, you laughed when your sister-in-law suggested I needed permission to remain part of this family. You excluded me from Christmas. You treated me like an obligation, a burden to be managed. The shame on their faces was profound, but I wasn't finished. Today, when you learned I have money, suddenly I'm family again. Suddenly Sarah's talking about what's yours is ours and making plans for how to spend my inheritance. The only thing that changed between yesterday and today was your knowledge of my bank account. That's not fair, Mom, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Sarah, tell me honestly, if you hadn't suspected I had money, would you have gone to all this trouble to research guardianship proceedings? Would you have been breaking into my house and going through my papers if you thought I was just a poor old woman with nothing to offer? Sarah's silence was answer enough. I turned to James. I want you to make some additional changes to my estate planning. I want Sarah banned from my property permanently. I want a restraining order filed if necessary. I want it clearly documented that any attempt to challenge my mental competency will result in immediate legal action. Mom, please. David stood up, reaching for me. Don't do this. Sarah made mistakes, but we can work through this. We're family. Are we? I asked. Because family doesn't plot to steal from each other. Family doesn't break into each other's homes. Family doesn't laugh when one of their own is excluded and humiliated. I picked up my purse and headed for the door, then turned back one final time. I'm going home now. To my house, which I own, on my property, which I bought with my money. I'll be changing the locks today. David, if you want to visit me, you'll need to call first and come alone. Rachel. Michael. The same goes for you. As for you, Sarah, I'll see you in court if you come within 100 yards of my property. You can't just cut us off, Sarah called after me, desperation clear in her voice. We have rights. David is your son. Those grandchildren are your family. I stopped at the door and looked back at her. You should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't worthy of a Christmas invitation. The silence that followed me out of that conference room was the sound of a family breaking apart, but for the first time in 3 years, it was also the sound of my freedom. The locksmith finished installing the new deadbolts just as the sun was setting. I stood in my front hallway, testing the new keys, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, complete control over my own space. For the first time since Richard died, no one could walk into my house uninvited. No one could search through my personal belongings. No one could make me feel like a stranger in my own home. The silence felt different now, not empty or lonely, but peaceful, clean. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Richard's old recliner, the one I'd moved back into the living room after Sarah had banished it to the basement 2 years ago. Everything about the house felt more like mine again, as if I'd been holding my breath for 3 years and could finally exhale. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left James's office 6 hours ago. 17 missed calls from David, 9 from Rachel, 5 from Michael, 12 text messages ranging from frantic apologies to angry demands that I stop being dramatic and talk to them like an adult. I turned the phone off. Tomorrow I would deal with the aftermath. Tonight, I just wanted to sit in my own house and remember who I used to be before I became someone who apologized for taking up space in her own family. The next morning brought a knock at my door at 7:30. Through the new peephole, I could see David standing on my porch, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking like he hadn't slept. Mom, please, I know you're in there. Can we just talk? I made my coffee and ignored him. He knocked for another 10 minutes before finally leaving. An hour later, Rachel showed up, then Michael. By noon, I'd had visits from all 3 of my children, 2 of my neighbors checking on me at my children's request, and somehow my sister in Florida had gotten involved and called to ask if I was having some kind of mental breakdown. I was beginning to understand why wealthy people moved to gated communities. The real surprise came that afternoon. I was in my garden, planting the spring bulbs I'd been meaning to get in the ground, when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked up to see Sarah getting out of a small moving truck. She marched across my yard like she owned it, her face set in determined lines. Margaret, this has gone far enough. We need to talk. You need to leave my property, I said calmly, not standing up from where I knelt among the tulip bulbs. I believe James was very clear about that. I don't care what James said. You're destroying my family over a misunderstanding. I sat back on my heels and really looked at her. Sarah was dressed in what I'd come to think of as her serious business outfit, the navy suit she wore to parent-teacher conferences and bank appointments. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like someone going into battle. Your family? I repeated. Interesting choice of words. You know what I mean. David's falling apart. The kids keep asking why Grandma won't see them. You're hurting innocent people to punish me for trying to look out for your best interests. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. It had been so long since I'd genuinely found something funny that the laughter felt rusty. Sarah, do you actually believe that? Do you really think that breaking into my house and researching how to have me declared incompetent was in my best interests? Her composure cracked slightly. I was trying to protect you from making mistakes with money you don't understand how to handle. I've been handling money longer than you've been alive, I said. I balanced Richard's construction business books for 25 years. I managed our household budget through recessions and boom times. I've been successfully investing my inheritance for 3 years without losing a penny. What exactly makes you think I don't understand money? You're old, she said bluntly. People your age make poor financial decisions. They get confused. They become targets for scammers. I was trying to make sure that didn't happen to you. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. Sarah, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because I'm only going to say it once. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see the uncertainty flicker in her eyes. I am not old, confused, or incompetent. I am not a target for scammers because I am not naive. I have been managing my own affairs quite successfully, thank you. What I am is done. Done with being treated like a child by someone young enough to be my daughter. Done with having my decisions questioned by someone who has never managed anything more complicated than a household budget. And done with pretending that your concern for me is anything more than concern for what you think you're entitled to inherit. That's not... Furthermore, I continued, my voice getting stronger, I want you to understand something about the money you've been so worried about. I don't need it. I never needed it. I kept the secret because I thought it would protect my family from becoming the kind of people who see dollar signs when they look at their elderly relatives. I was wrong. You were already those people. The money just gave you something concrete to scheme about. Sarah's face was flushed now, her perfect composure completely gone. You can't just cut us off. David is your son. He loves you. David laughed when you suggested I needed permission to stay in this family. David gave you a key to my house without asking me. David has stood by and watched you undermine me for 3 years without saying a word. If that's what David calls love, then I'm not interested in it. Fine, Sarah snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. Be a bitter old woman living alone with your money. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you realize how lonely you are. I won't, I said. But Sarah, don't expect me to come crawling back when David realizes what kind of person he married. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to keep fighting or cut her losses. Finally, she turned and stalked back to the moving truck. You'll regret this, she called over her shoulder. I doubt it, I replied. I watched her drive away, then went back to my tulip bulbs. They would bloom in the spring, just like I would. The weeks that followed were quieter than any I'd experienced since Richard's death. My children continued to call and text, but less frequently as time went on. The desperate apologies gave way to hurt confusion, then to angry demands that I stop punishing them for Sarah's mistakes, and finally to a kind of resigned silence. I didn't feel guilty about it. For the first time in years, I felt free. I hired a housekeeper. Not because I needed one, but because I could afford one, and I was tired of spending my time on chores I didn't enjoy. I bought a new car, something reliable and comfortable that I'd chosen entirely for myself, without considering whether it would fit grandchildren's car seats or look appropriate for a widow my age. I started taking art classes at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was busy managing everyone else's needs. I joined a book club and made friends with women who knew me as Margaret, not as someone's mother or grandmother or widow. Most importantly, I began making plans for my future that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations or needs. The property I'd been eyeing was a small farm about an hour outside of town. 40 acres of rolling hills with a modest farmhouse that had been lovingly maintained. It reminded me of my father's place, but without the weight of family history and obligation. I made an offer, and it was accepted within a week. The phone call came 3 months after the confrontation in James's office. David's number appeared on my screen just as I was finishing packing books into moving boxes. Mom, it's David. Can you talk? I almost didn't answer. But something in his voice, a quality I hadn't heard in years, made me pick up. Hello, David. Mom, Sarah and I are getting divorced. I stopped packing and sat down heavily on the couch. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? His voice cracked slightly. because I think you saw this coming long before I did. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of maternal instinct warring with hard-won wisdom. What happened? I found out she's been doing things, not just to you. She opened credit cards in my name. She's been lying to me about money, about bills, about a lot of things. And Mom, his voice broke completely. She told Emma that you didn't love us anymore, that you were a mean old lady who cared more about money than family. The rage that swept through me was swift and clean. She said that to my granddaughter? Emma's been having nightmares. She keeps asking why Grandma doesn't want to see her anymore. I didn't know what Sarah had told her until last week. I felt something crack open in my chest, something that had been frozen solid for months. David, I need you to understand something. I never stopped loving you, any of you, but I couldn't continue to be part of a family that didn't respect me. I couldn't keep pretending that being treated like a burden was the same as being loved. I know, he whispered. Mom, I know, and I'm so sorry. I was so focused on keeping Sarah happy that I forgot to think about whether she was right. I forgot to protect you the way you always protected me. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 3 years of hurt and misunderstanding settling between us. Mom, is there any chance? Could I bring Emma to see you? Just Emma. She misses you so much, and I think she needs to know that her grandmother loves her. I looked around my half-packed living room, at the life I was preparing to leave behind, at the future I was building for myself alone. Yes, I said, bring her this weekend. But David, this doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. Too much has happened for that. I understand, he said quickly. I want to try to rebuild something real with you, if you'll let me. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not for a return to the past, but for the possibility of a future that included the people I loved without requiring me to diminish myself. The tulips I'd planted that day Sarah came to confront me had bloomed beautifully. Soon, I would transplant them to my new home, where they could grow without anyone questioning whether they deserved the space they occupied. Just like me. The farmhouse sat on a gentle hill overlooking 40 acres of the most beautiful land I'd ever owned. From my front porch, I could see the small pond where wild ducks had taken up residence, the old oak tree that was perfect for reading under, and the vegetable garden I'd planned for next spring. For the first time in my adult life, every single thing I could see belonged to me and answered to no one else. It had been 8 months since I moved here. 8 months since I left behind the house where I'd raised my children and lived with Richard. That house sold within 2 weeks of being listed. Apparently, everyone wanted to live in our old neighborhood except me. I was painting the kitchen cabinets a cheerful yellow when I heard a car coming up the gravel driveway. Through the window, I could see David's familiar sedan, and my heart did a little skip as I spotted Emma's small face pressed against the passenger window. This would be our 4th visit since that phone call back in the spring. David had been true to his word about rebuilding our relationship slowly and honestly. He came alone the first time, just to talk. The second visit, he'd brought Emma, who cried when she saw me and asked why I'd gone away. The third time, Emma had stayed overnight, and we'd made pancakes and planted flowers and talked about everything except the missing years. Today felt different, though. David had asked if he could bring someone with him. I cleaned the paint from my hands and went outside to greet them. Emma bounded out of the car and into my arms like she always did now, all 10-year-old energy and unconditional love. "Grandma, I brought you something." She held up a drawing of our farmhouse, complete with the duck pond and the oak tree. I drew it from memory. "It's perfect, sweetheart," I told her, and meant it. David got out more slowly, then turned to help someone else from the back seat. A woman about my age with kind eyes and laugh lines, carrying a pie carrier and looking nervous. "Mom," David said, "I'd like you to meet Linda. We've been seeing each other for a few months now." Linda stepped forward with a genuine smile. "Mrs. Wilson, it's such a pleasure to meet you. David talks about you constantly, and Emma has told me all about your ducks." I liked her immediately. There was nothing calculated about her approach, no sense that she was performing for my benefit. She seemed genuinely interested in meeting me, not in making an impression. Please call me Margaret, and thank you for the pie. It smells wonderful. It's apple cinnamon, Linda said. Emma mentioned it was your favorite. We settled on the front porch with iced tea while Emma ran down to feed the ducks the bread crusts I kept in a jar by the door. The afternoon was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers from the field beyond the garden. Linda's a teacher, David said, settling into the rocking chair I'd bought just for his visits. 3rd grade. She's got 2 grown kids of her own. And you? I asked Linda. How do you feel about inheriting a ready-made, complicated family situation? Linda laughed, a genuine sound that reminded me of myself at her age. Honestly, it's refreshing. My first husband left me for his secretary when my kids were teenagers. I've been on my own for 12 years now, and I'd gotten pretty good at it. I wasn't looking for anyone who needed me to take care of them or fix their problems. And David doesn't need fixing? David needs someone who appreciates the man he's becoming instead of trying to change him into someone else, she said, glancing at him with obvious affection. He's doing the hard work of figuring out who he is when he's not trying to please everyone else. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized she was right. The stressed, anxious man who'd been married to Sarah was gone. This David sat straighter, spoke with more confidence, and seemed genuinely at peace with himself. The divorce was finalized last month, he said quietly. Sarah moved back to her hometown. She tried to take Emma with her. My blood chilled. What do you mean? Tried. She filed for primary custody, claiming I was unstable because I was choosing my mother's money over my wife's emotional well-being. David's voice was bitter. She actually argued in court that my relationship with you was evidence of poor judgment. What happened? Linda reached over and squeezed David's hand. Tell her about the judge. David smiled for the first time since bringing up the custody battle. Judge Martinez is a woman about your age, Mom. When Sarah's lawyer started arguing that my mother was manipulating me with her money, Judge Martinez asked to see evidence of this manipulation. And Sarah's lawyer presented the inheritance information, the property ownership records, all of it. Then Judge Martinez asked Sarah directly what specific harm had been done to Emma by my relationship with my mother. I could see where this was going, and I felt a warm satisfaction spreading through my chest. Sarah couldn't answer. She talked about family loyalty and proper boundaries and age-appropriate financial responsibility, but she couldn't point to a single way that you had actually harmed Emma or me. Meanwhile, my lawyer presented evidence of Sarah's attempted guardianship filing, the break-ins, the lies to Emma about why you weren't in our lives anymore. Judge Martinez awarded David primary custody, Linda continued. Sarah gets Emma every other weekend and 1 week in the summer, but Emma lives with David. And Mom, she also issued a formal reprimand to Sarah's lawyer for bringing frivolous claims to her courtroom. I felt something tight in my chest finally loosen completely. Emma was safe, David was free, and Sarah's manipulations had been officially recognized for what they were. There's something else, David said, looking nervous again. Emma, can you come here for a minute? Emma ran up from the pond, slightly out of breath and completely happy. What, Daddy? Remember what we talked about in the car? About the question you wanted to ask Grandma? Emma suddenly looked shy, twisting her hands in her shirt. Grandma, Daddy says you might be okay with it if I came to stay with you sometimes. Like, maybe for a week in the summer? Linda says you have enough room, and I promise I wouldn't get in the way of your painting or your garden or anything. The hope in her voice was almost too much to bear. Oh, sweetheart, I would love that. You could have your own room, and we could plant a special section of the garden just for you. Really? Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. Could I help take care of the ducks, too? They'd probably prefer you to me, I told her. They're getting quite spoiled with all the attention. As Emma ran back to the pond to share the good news with the ducks, David turned to me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I can't thank you enough. For everything. For protecting yourself when we couldn't. For showing me what self-respect looks like. For being willing to let me try again. You're my son, I said simply. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped accepting behavior that hurt me. I understand the difference now, he said. I understand that loving someone doesn't mean letting them treat you badly. Sarah never understood that. What about Rachel and Michael? I asked. Do you think they understand it? David's face grew troubled. Rachel's been asking about you. I think she wants to reach out, but she's afraid you won't forgive her. Michael's still angry. He thinks you overreacted, and he's upset about the inheritance changes. I don't think he's ready to admit he was wrong. I nodded. I'd expected this. Rachel had always been the most emotionally aware of my children, while Michael had inherited his father's stubborn streak along with his medical ambitions. Rachel's welcome here anytime she wants to come, I said. But she has to come because she genuinely wants a relationship with me, not because she feels guilty or thinks she should. And Michael will come around when he's ready, or he won't. I can't force him to value me. That's very wise, Linda said quietly. I learned that with my own kids. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them experience the consequences of their choices without trying to rescue them from those consequences. As the afternoon wore on, we talked about lighter things. Linda's teaching stories, Emma's upcoming school play, David's new job at a smaller construction company where he felt more valued. I told them about my art classes, my book club, my plans for expanding the garden next year. It was the kind of afternoon I'd dreamed of having with my family. Relaxed, genuine, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. As the sun began to set, David and Linda started gathering their things to leave. Emma was reluctant to go, as always, but perked up when I reminded her that she'd be back in 2 weeks for her first overnight stay of the summer. Mom, David said as he hugged me goodbye, I know things can't go back to the way they were before. Too much has happened for that. But I want you to know that what we have now, this feels more real to me than anything we had when I was trying to keep everyone happy. It is more real, I agreed. Because it's based on choice instead of assumption. You're here because you want to be here, not because you feel obligated to be here. And because you're here because you want to be, Linda added, not because you're trying to earn your place in the family. After they left, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ducks were settled for the night. The garden was peaceful, and my house felt like exactly what it was. A home I'd chosen for myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. Mom, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. David told me about your new place and how happy you seem. I was wondering if maybe I could come visit sometime. I know I have a lot to apologize for, and I understand if you need more time. But I miss you. I miss my mom. I smiled and typed back. Come this weekend. Bring comfortable clothes and be prepared to help me paint the guest room. It's going to be Emma's room when she stays here. Her response came immediately. I'll be there. And Mom, I'm so sorry it took me this long to reach out. I was afraid you'd reject me the way I rejected you. Never, I typed. You're my daughter. The door is always open when you're ready to walk through it with respect and love. I put the phone down and rocked gently in my chair, listening to the evening sounds of my land. Crickets chirping, the gentle lapping of water against the pond shore, the rustle of leaves in the oak tree. This was what peace felt like. Not the absence of family, but the presence of family relationships that honored everyone involved. Not the silence of isolation, but the calm of knowing that the people in my life chose to be there. I thought about Sarah, wherever she was now, probably still convinced that she'd been wronged, still unable to see that her actions had created the very situation she'd tried to avoid. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't feel responsible for her anymore. I thought about Michael, still nursing his anger and his sense of entitlement. I hoped he'd come around eventually, but I'd learned that hoping wasn't the same as waiting. I wouldn't put my life on hold for anyone, ever again. Most of all, I thought about the woman I'd become over the past year. Stronger, more confident, unafraid to take up space in the world. I'd learned that protecting yourself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I'd learned that being alone was better than being with people who didn't value you. And I'd learned that it was never too late to start choosing yourself. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, I would paint kitchen cabinets and tend my garden, and maybe call that travel agent about the trip to Ireland I'd been considering. Next weekend, Rachel would come, and we'd start rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect instead of assumed obligation. But tonight, I was content to sit on my porch in the house I'd chosen, on the land I'd bought, surrounded by the life I'd built for myself. At 69 years old, I was finally living entirely on my own terms, and it felt wonderful,